The phone rang at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I knew something was wrong. My neighbor across the street, Mrs. Henderson, was whispering urgently into her phone. "Jim, you need to know there are 3 police cars outside your house right now. Officers are getting out with their hands near their weapons. I heard sirens coming from 2 different directions." My heart pounded as I looked through my front window. Blue and red lights painted my driveway in alternating colors. My younger brother, Derek, had just convinced our parents that I was having a dangerous mental breakdown and posed a serious threat to our entire family. I realized this was Derek's calculated move to steal the inheritance from our recently deceased grandfather. As heavy footsteps approached my front door, I took a deep breath and opened it before they could knock. 3 uniformed officers stood there, tension written across their faces. I smiled warmly at them and stepped aside. "Please come in. I have something to show you." 3 weeks earlier, life had been completely different. My grandfather Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep at 84, surrounded by family members who genuinely loved him. The funeral brought together relatives I hadn't seen in years, and despite our grief, there was something comforting about sharing memories of the man who had taught me everything about integrity and hard work. The reading of Grandpa Samuel's will happened the following Tuesday at the law office of Henderson, Martinez and Associates. I sat in the mahogany-paneled conference room next to my younger brother Derek, both of us wearing our best suits, out of respect for the occasion. Our parents, Margaret and Robert, occupied the chairs directly across from us, while various aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the remaining seats. Attorney Henderson cleared his throat and began reading the legal document in his measured professional tone. When he reached the section about the primary inheritance, my world shifted completely. Grandpa Samuel had left me the bulk of his estate, nearly $2 million, plus the family ranch that had been in our family for 3 generations. Derek's face went pale, then flushed red. He had always been the golden child, the one who could charm our parents into anything, the one everyone expected to inherit the family legacy. His construction business was struggling financially, and I knew he had been counting on this inheritance to solve his mounting debt problems. "Jim," Derek said quietly, as we walked to our cars after the meeting, "I want you to know I'm happy for you. Grandpa Samuel made the right choice." But something in his voice didn't sound genuine. There was a forced quality to his words that made me uncomfortable. Still, family loyalty ran deep in our household, and I had already made my decision. "Derek, I've been thinking about this since we heard the will," I said, placing my hand on his shoulder. "I want to split everything 50-50 with you. Grandpa Samuel loved both of us equally, and I think that's what he would have wanted deep down." Derek's eyes widened with what appeared to be genuine surprise and gratitude. "Jim, are you serious? That's incredibly generous of you." "Of course I'm serious. We're brothers. Family means everything." Over the next few days, Derek seemed to return to his normal, cheerful self. He called me regularly to discuss plans for the ranch and how we might honor Grandpa Samuel's memory. But my girlfriend Sarah, who worked as a nurse at the local hospital and had developed sharp instincts about human behavior, started noticing subtle changes in Derek's demeanor. "There's something different about the way he asks questions now," Sarah told me one evening as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset. "When he called yesterday, he kept probing about your therapy sessions. Why would he care about your anxiety treatment?" I had been seeing Dr. Patricia Wells for mild anxiety issues related to work stress. Nothing serious, just occasional sessions to help me develop better coping mechanisms. Derek had never shown interest in my mental health before. "He's probably just being a concerned brother," I replied, though Sarah's observation planted a seed of doubt in my mind. "Jim, I've worked with manipulative people in the hospital setting. There's a pattern to how they gather information. They ask leading questions that seem innocent, but are actually fishing expeditions." The following week, I started noticing the same thing Sarah had picked up on. Derek would call and casually bring up my therapy appointments, asking if I was feeling more stable, or if Dr. Wells thought I was making progress with my emotional regulation. These weren't the kinds of questions a supportive brother would typically ask. Then, extended family members began reaching out with strange comments. Aunt Linda called to check if I was doing okay emotionally after the inheritance news. Uncle Frank mentioned that Derek had expressed some concerns about how I was handling the pressure of suddenly having so much responsibility. The pieces clicked into place when I discovered Derek had been recording our phone conversations. I found out by accident when I called him while he was in his car, and I heard the distinct beep of a recording device starting up. When I asked him about it, he claimed it was just his hands-free system malfunctioning. But that night, I received a call from our mother Margaret, and she sounded genuinely worried. "Jim, honey, Derek played me some recordings of your recent conversations, and you sound so paranoid and unstable. You keep talking about people being out to get you, and how you can't trust anyone. This doesn't sound like the son I raised." My blood ran cold. Derek had been editing our conversations, taking fragments out of context, and piecing them together to create a completely false narrative about my mental state. The brother I had trusted enough to share my inheritance with was actively working to destroy my reputation and credibility. Derek's manipulation campaign escalated rapidly after that phone call with our mother. He had masterfully positioned himself as the concerned, responsible brother who was only looking out for the family's best interests. Within days, he had convinced our parents that my decision to share the inheritance equally was actually evidence of delusions of grandeur and poor judgment. Think about it logically. Derek told our parents during a family dinner I wasn't invited to. Grandpa Samuel spent months carefully considering his will. He consulted with lawyers, financial advisors, and tax specialists. Jim's impulsive decision to change everything shows he's not thinking clearly. He's making major financial decisions while his mental health is obviously compromised. Margaret became genuinely frightened for my well-being. Derek fed her maternal fears with carefully crafted stories about concerning things I had allegedly said during our private conversations. He claimed I had made veiled threats about what would happen to anyone who tried to interfere with my plans for the ranch. The manipulation reached a new level when Derek contacted Dr. Patricia Wells's office. Pretending to be a concerned family member, he left messages asking about my treatment and whether I posed any danger to myself or others. The office couldn't release any information due to patient confidentiality laws, but Derek used their professional responses as fuel for his narrative. "The fact that they won't tell us anything means they're really worried," Derek told our parents. Mental health professionals only maintain that level of secrecy when they're dealing with serious safety concerns. 2 weeks after the will reading, I arrived at our parents' house for what I thought was a casual family dinner. Instead, I walked into an intervention-style meeting. Margaret and Robert sat at the kitchen table with Derek, Aunt Linda, and Uncle Frank. The atmosphere felt heavy and confrontational. "Jim, we need to have a serious conversation," Margaret said, her voice shaking with emotion. "We're all very worried about you." Derek had prepared for this moment carefully. He presented what he called evidence of my deteriorating mental state. The edited recordings, testimonials from family members about my increasingly erratic behavior, and his own detailed observations about my paranoid tendencies. "Listen to yourself in these recordings," Jim, Derek said, playing audio clips on his phone. "You're talking about people plotting against you, claiming that someone is trying to steal from you. This level of paranoia isn't normal." The recordings were skillfully edited. Derek had taken comments I made about being careful with business contracts and spliced them together with completely unrelated statements about trusting people. The result sounded like the paranoid ramblings of someone losing touch with reality. "I never said those things in that context," I protested, but Derek had anticipated this response. Denial is a classic symptom. He explained to the family with the authority of someone who had obviously done his research. People experiencing mental health crises genuinely believe their distorted version of events is accurate. Sarah tried to defend me, pointing out inconsistencies in Derek's timeline and questioning why these alleged incidents had never been mentioned before. But Derek had prepared for this too. "Sarah, I understand you want to support Jim, but enabling his delusions isn't helping anyone, Derek said with practiced concern. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is insist that someone get professional help even when they resist. Aunt Linda, who had always been jealous of my academic and professional success, eagerly supported Derek's narrative. I've noticed Jim becoming more withdrawn and suspicious over the past few months, she lied smoothly. He seems to think everyone is plotting against him. Uncle Frank appeared uncomfortable with the entire situation, but family pressure and Derek's persuasive presentation made him reluctant to speak up in my defense. The meeting concluded with Derek suggesting that I needed an immediate psychiatric evaluation for everyone's safety. He had researched involuntary commitment procedures and presented them as reasonable precautions rather than extreme measures. "We just want to make sure you get the help you need," Margaret said through tears. "If you're not willing to seek treatment voluntarily, we might have to explore other options." As I left my parents' house that night, I realized Derek's plan was far more sophisticated than simple sibling rivalry over money. He was systematically destroying my credibility and relationships, positioning himself as the rational, responsible family member, while painting me as dangerously unstable. The most chilling part was how effective his strategy had been. In less than 3 weeks, he had turned my own family against me, using nothing but lies, manipulation, and edited recordings. The brother I had been willing to share millions of dollars with was actively working to have me declared mentally incompetent. But Derek had made one crucial mistake. His manipulation was so extensive and detailed that it left a trail of evidence. As Sarah and I drove home from that disastrous family meeting, I realized I needed to start documenting everything Derek was doing before his lies became the accepted family truth. The next morning, I began my own investigation into Derek's activities, finances, and recent behavior. If he wanted to play psychological warfare, I would be ready with facts and evidence rather than emotional manipulation. What I discovered over the following days was far worse than simple inheritance fraud. Derek's financial problems were much more serious than anyone realized, and his willingness to destroy his own brother suggested he was capable of almost anything. Derek's escalation beyond family manipulation came exactly 1 week after the intervention meeting. Having successfully turned our parents and extended family against me, he was ready to involve outside authorities in his scheme. That Tuesday morning, Derek called the county mental health crisis hotline and filed a report claiming I was armed, dangerous, and actively threatening family members. My brother inherited a large sum of money recently, and it's triggered some kind of psychological break, Derek told the crisis counselor with practiced emotion in his voice. He's been making threats about what he'll do to anyone who tries to interfere with his plans. Yesterday, he told our mother that he has ways of dealing with people who cross him. My family is genuinely scared. The crisis counselor was legally obligated to take such reports seriously, especially when they involved potential threats of violence. Derek knew exactly which words would trigger an emergency response: armed, dangerous threats, family safety. He had researched the system thoroughly. An hour later, Margaret received a follow-up call from the crisis center, asking her to confirm Derek's report. By this point, Derek's manipulation had been so effective that our mother genuinely believed I posed a threat to the family. Through tears, she confirmed that she was afraid of me and requested immediate intervention. "Please help us," Margaret told the counselor. "My son is very dangerous to the family and needs to be dealt with before someone gets hurt." The crisis center immediately contacted local law enforcement to request a welfare check with backup units standing by. Derek made sure he wasn't anywhere near my house when the police arrived, maintaining plausible deniability about his role in triggering the emergency response. But while Derek was orchestrating this latest attack on my credibility, I had been conducting my own investigation into his background and recent activities. What I discovered was shocking enough to change the entire dynamic of our family conflict. Derek's financial problems weren't just the result of a struggling construction business. Over the past 18 months, He had been systematically embezzling money from his employer, Midwest Commercial Construction. The scheme involved inflating material costs on large projects and keeping the difference for himself. Derek had stolen nearly $300,000, and his employer was getting close to discovering the fraud. Sarah had helped me dig deeper into public records and financial databases. Her nursing background had taught her to be methodical and thorough in research skills that proved invaluable in uncovering Derek's criminal activities. "Look at these bank deposits," Sarah said, spreading printouts across my kitchen table. Every time Midwest Commercial paid their material suppliers, Derek made cash deposits into his personal account for exactly the difference between the inflated invoices and the actual costs. Derek had created fake supplier accounts and fraudulent invoices to cover his tracks, but the pattern was clear once we knew what to look for. He was facing not just civil liability, but serious federal charges for mail fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement. The timeline was crucial. Derek's crimes would inevitably be discovered within the next few weeks, as Midwest Commercial's annual audit uncovered the discrepancies. By having me declared mentally incompetent beforehand, Derek could discredit any accusations I might make while positioning himself as the stable, trustworthy family member. But the most disturbing discovery came when I found Derek's burner phone hidden in his truck. Sarah and I had followed him to a construction site and searched his vehicle while he was in a meeting with potential clients. The phone contained text message chains that revealed the true scope of Derek's scheme. Derek had been communicating with at least 3 accomplices, a document forger and accountant willing to create false financial records, and someone Derek referred to only as the consultant, who seemed to be coaching him on psychological manipulation techniques. Phase 2 complete. Read one message from Derek to the consultant. Family convinced of instability narrative. Ready to proceed with involuntary commitment strategy. The response chilled me to the bone. Excellent work. Once legal guardianship established, you'll have complete control over inheritance and can handle grandfather situation permanently. Grandfather situation. Derek wasn't just talking about the inheritance. He was referring to something he had done to Grandpa Samuel himself. I scrolled through more messages and found exchanges from several months earlier, before Grandpa Samuel's death. Derek had been researching untraceable substances that could mimic natural causes of death in elderly people. He had also been inquiring about methods for inducing confusion and memory loss that might make an elderly person more susceptible to changing their will. The horrible truth hit me like a physical blow. Derek hadn't just been planning to steal my inheritance. He had been slowly poisoning our grandfather in his final weeks, causing the confusion and disorientation that prompted Grandpa Samuel to update his will in the first place. Derek had murdered our grandfather to accelerate the inheritance timeline, then launched an elaborate psychological warfare campaign against me to ensure he would ultimately control the money. The brother I had trusted enough to share millions with had committed patricide and was now trying to have me declared insane to cover his tracks. As I sat in my living room that Tuesday evening, organizing all the evidence Sarah and I had gathered, Mrs. Henderson called with her, warning about the police cars outside my house. Derek's plan was reaching its culmination, but he had no idea that his intended victim was ready with evidence of crimes far more serious than inheritance fraud. The officers approaching my front door expected to find a dangerous, mentally unstable man. Instead, they were about to walk into a carefully laid trap that would expose a calculated killer who had manipulated an entire family and murdered an innocent elderly man for money. I opened the door with a calm smile and invited them inside, knowing that the next hour would either vindicate me completely or destroy me forever. The evidence folder in my hand contained enough proof to send Derek to prison for life, but I needed the police to listen long enough to review it all. "Officers, I am very glad you're here," I said as they cautiously entered my living room. "I have something extremely important to show you about why you were really called to my house tonight." The 3 officers who entered my home that night represented the County Sheriff's Department's most experienced crisis intervention team. Sergeant Martinez, a 20-year veteran with extensive training in mental health emergencies, led the group. Officers Thompson and Chen flanked him, their hands resting casually near their weapons, while their eyes scanned my living room for potential threats. "Sir, we received reports that you might be experiencing some mental health difficulties and could pose a danger to yourself or your family members," Sergeant Martinez said in the calm, professional tone they use for these situations. "We're here to make sure everyone stays safe and to connect you with appropriate resources if needed." I gestured toward my dining room table, where I had spent the afternoon organizing 2 thick folders full of documentation. "Sergeant Martinez, before we discuss my alleged mental health crisis, I need to show you evidence of several serious crimes that directly relate to why you were called here tonight." The officers exchanged glances. This wasn't the response they typically encountered during mental health crisis calls. Most people in genuine psychological distress weren't methodically organized or calmly presenting evidence folders. "Sir, let's focus on the immediate situation," Officer Thompson interjected. "Your family members are very concerned about some statements you've allegedly made. They're worried about your well-being and their own safety. I understand completely, and their concerns are the direct result of an elaborate manipulation campaign designed to discredit me before I could expose what I'm about to show you." I opened the first folder and spread out bank records, employment documents, and financial statements across the table. My brother Derek has been embezzling money from his employer, Midwest Commercial Construction, for over 18 months. These documents show nearly $300,000 in fraudulent transactions. Sergeant Martinez approached the table and began examining the paperwork. His expression shifted from skeptical concern to serious interest as he recognized the detailed financial evidence laid out before him. "These appear to be legitimate bank records and employment documents," he said to his colleagues. "Thompson, contact Midwest Commercial and see if they have any active investigations involving Derek Henderson." While Officer Thompson made his phone call, I opened the second folder. This evidence is much more serious, and it directly explains why Derek orchestrated tonight's police response. I showed them printouts of the text messages from Derek's burner phone highlighted to emphasize the most damning exchanges. The officers read in silence as the scope of Derek's scheme became clear. "Holy hell," Officer Chen muttered as he read Derek's messages about handling grandfather's situation permanently. "Sir, where did you obtain these text messages?" Sergeant Martinez asked. I found Derek's burner phone and photographed the contents before returning it to his vehicle. "I know that might not be admissible in court, but it provides a roadmap for your investigation." Officer Thompson returned from his phone call with a grim expression. "Midwest Commercial confirms they have an active embezzlement investigation involving Derek Henderson. They've been working with the FBI on federal charges. The company's security director wants to speak with us immediately." Sarah arrived at that moment carrying additional evidence we had gathered during our investigation. The officers allowed her to enter after confirming she was my girlfriend and had been working with me to document Derek's crimes. "I brought the medical records," Sarah told me then, addressed the officers. "I work as a nurse at Mercy General Hospital. I've been helping Jim research some very disturbing patterns in his grandfather's final medical treatment." She spread out hospital records and medication logs on the table. Samuel Henderson was admitted 3 times in his final 2 months for confusion, disorientation, and memory problems. The symptoms were consistent with pharmaceutical poisoning, but doctors attributed them to normal aging. "What kind of pharmaceutical poisoning?" Sergeant Martinez asked. "Several synthetic compounds can mimic dementia symptoms while being virtually undetectable in standard blood work," Sarah explained. "The most common is a class of research chemicals that cause temporary cognitive impairment without leaving obvious traces." I pulled out copies of Grandpa Samuel's modified will and the original version from 2 years earlier. Derek's poisoning campaign convinced our grandfather that he was losing his mental faculties. That's why Grandpa Samuel changed his will to designate a single primary beneficiary instead of splitting everything equally between Derek and me. But ironically, the new will favored you instead of Derek, Officer Chen observed. "Exactly. Derek's manipulation backfired because Grandpa Samuel's confusion made him more suspicious of Derek, not less. But Derek was already committed to his timeline. He had to eliminate our grandfather before his crimes were discovered at work. Officer Thompson's radio crackled with an incoming message. All units be advised that Derek Henderson is currently approaching the residence at 457 Maple Street. Suspect is unaware of police presence. Through my front window, we could see Derek's pickup truck pulling into my driveway. He was arriving to witness what he expected to be my arrest and involuntary psychiatric commitment. Instead, he was walking directly into the trap he had set for me. Officers, this is your opportunity to observe Derek's manipulative behavior firsthand, I said. He's coming here expecting to find me in custody. Watch how he reacts when he realizes his plan has failed. Sergeant Martinez positioned his officers strategically around my living room, while I moved to answer the front door. Derek's confident smile disappeared the moment he saw police officers standing behind me instead of arresting me. "Jim, what's going on here?" Derek asked, his voice carrying forced concern, but his eyes betraying genuine panic. "Come in, Derek. These officers have some questions about your recent activities." Derek stepped cautiously into my living room, scanning the evidence spread across my dining room table. His face went pale as he recognized bank records and text message printouts. "I don't understand what this is about," Derek said, but his voice was already beginning to crack under pressure. "Mr. Derek Henderson," Sergeant Martinez announced, "you're under arrest for embezzlement fraud, elder abuse, and suspected murder. You have the right to remain silent." Derek's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled as the handcuffs clicked into place. The brother who had spent weeks convincing our family that I was mentally unstable was now facing life in prison for crimes that revealed him to be a calculating sociopath. The manipulation campaign that was supposed to destroy my credibility had instead provided law enforcement with a detailed record of Derek's criminal planning and psychological manipulation techniques. His own burner phone contained enough evidence to convict him on multiple felony charges. As Officer Chen read Derek his Miranda rights, I realized that Grandpa Samuel's decision to make me the primary beneficiary hadn't been the confused choice of a poisoned mind. It had been the final, clear-headed decision of a man who recognized which of his grandsons truly embodied the values of integrity and family loyalty that he had spent his lifetime modeling. Derek's arrest triggered an immediate chain reaction that would ultimately expose the full scope of his manipulation and crimes. Within hours of his booking at the county jail, investigators from multiple agencies converged to coordinate their various cases against him. The first to arrive at my house was Detective Rachel Morrison from the Sheriff's Department's Financial Crimes Unit. She had been tracking unusual banking patterns related to several construction companies in our county and was immediately interested in the evidence we had gathered about Derek's embezzlement scheme. "Mr. Henderson, this documentation is remarkably thorough," Detective Morrison said as she reviewed our folders. "How did you know to look for these specific financial patterns?" "My girlfriend Sarah taught me to be systematic in research. We approach this like a medical diagnosis, gather symptoms, look for patterns, test hypotheses with evidence." Sarah nodded. "In nursing, you learn that the most dangerous conditions often present with subtle symptoms that seem unrelated until you see the full pattern. Derek's manipulation had that same quality." Detective Morrison's phone buzzed with an incoming call from FBI agent David Park, who was leading the federal investigation into Derek's embezzlement activities. The agent was driving from the regional field office and wanted to coordinate with local law enforcement before interviewing Derek. "Agent Park, we've got a much bigger situation than simple embezzlement," Detective Morrison told him over speakerphone. "We're looking at possible murder charges related to the suspect's grandfather." While we waited for the federal agent to arrive, our parents showed up at my house in a state of complete confusion and panic. Margaret had received a call from the jail, informing her that Derek had been arrested on multiple felony charges. She was expecting to find me in psychiatric custody, not Derek facing life in prison. "Jim, I don't understand what's happening." Margaret said through tears as she entered my living room. Derek called me this afternoon to say the police were going to help you get the mental health treatment you needed. Now they're saying he's been arrested for embezzling money and possibly murdering Dad. Robert stood behind her, looking shell-shocked. Son, we owe you an enormous apology. Derek convinced us you were having some kind of breakdown. He showed us recordings of phone conversations where you sounded paranoid and unstable. Those recordings were edited, Dad. Derek had been manipulating all of us for months, building a false narrative to cover up his real crimes. I showed them some of the evidence we had gathered, particularly the text messages revealing Derek's coordination with accomplices. Margaret broke down completely as she realized how thoroughly Derek had exploited her maternal instincts and fears. He knew exactly which buttons to push, she sobbed. Every story he told me was designed to make me think you were dangerous. He used my love for both of you as a weapon. Agent Park arrived with a team of federal investigators, just as Aunt Linda and Uncle Frank were pulling into my driveway. Derek's arrest had become neighborhood news, and family members were converging to understand what had happened to their golden child. Aunt Linda's reaction was particularly telling. As soon as she saw federal agents carrying evidence boxes into my house, she immediately began distancing herself from Derek and his schemes. I want everyone to know that Derek approached me with lies about Jim, she announced to anyone who would listen. He coached me on what to say during that family meeting. I should have known something was wrong when he kept insisting that Jim was dangerous. Uncle Frank, who had been uncomfortable with Derek's manipulation from the beginning, finally felt safe to speak up about his own concerns. Derek tried to recruit me into his scheme about 6 months ago, Frank told Agent Park. He wanted me to corroborate stories about Jim's mental instability. When I refused, he threatened to cut me out of family gatherings. I was afraid to say anything, because Derek seemed to have everyone else convinced. The federal investigation moved quickly once agents had access to our evidence and Derek's burner phone. Within 48 hours, they had arrested Derek's 3 accomplices and recovered most of the embezzled funds from various hidden accounts. But the most significant breakthrough came when the medical examiner agreed to perform additional toxicology testing on Grandpa Samuel's remains. Agent Park had expedited the request based on the text message evidence suggesting Derek had poisoned our grandfather. The original autopsy was consistent with natural causes. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, the medical examiner, explained to our family 3 days after Derek's arrest. But we weren't looking for synthetic compounds that mimic natural aging processes. Your evidence led us to test for specific research chemicals that weren't on our standard panels. The results were conclusive. Grandpa Samuel's tissue samples contained lethal levels of a synthetic compound that Derek had been administering over several weeks. The substance caused exactly the confusion and disorientation that had prompted our grandfather to modify his will. Your grandfather didn't die of natural causes, Dr. Carter told us gently. He was murdered slowly and deliberately by someone he trusted completely. Derek's employer, Midwest Commercial Construction, arrived that afternoon to begin recovering the stolen funds and assessing the damage to their business operations. Company President Michael Walsh had worked with Derek for over 5 years and was shocked by the extent of his crimes. Derek was one of our most trusted project managers, Walsh explained to Agent Park. He had access to vendor accounts and invoice processing because we considered him family. The betrayal goes far beyond just stealing money. Meanwhile, Derek's psychological evaluation was revealing disturbing details about his antisocial personality disorder and capacity for long-term manipulation. Dr. Jennifer Ross, the court-appointed psychiatrist, described Derek as one of the most calculating and remorseless individuals she had encountered in 20 years of forensic psychology. Derek shows classic signs of psychopathy combined with exceptional intelligence and planning ability, Dr. Ross reported to the court. His manipulation of family members demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of human psychology and emotional vulnerability. As the investigation expanded, more victims of Derek's manipulation came forward. Co-workers at Midwest Commercial described how Derek had been spreading rumors about their competence and reliability to eliminate competition for promotions. Neighbors reported that Derek had been gathering personal information about our family's financial situation and medical history. Even Derek's ex-girlfriend from college contacted authorities to report that he had stolen her identity and opened credit cards in her name before disappearing from her life completely. The community rallied around our family as news of Derek's crimes spread through local media. Grandpa Samuel had been beloved in our small town, and people were horrified to learn that his own grandson had murdered him for money. Samuel Henderson was one of the finest men I ever knew, said Pastor Williams from our family's church during the community memorial service. His legacy of integrity and kindness makes his grandson's betrayal even more tragic. But amid all the pain and betrayal, our family was beginning to heal in ways that hadn't seemed possible just weeks earlier. The truth about Derek's manipulation had freed us from years of dysfunction and enabling behavior that we hadn't even recognized. Margaret entered therapy to understand how she had been manipulated and to develop better boundaries for future relationships. Robert committed to family counseling to rebuild his relationship with me and learn more active communication skills. I realize now that I was afraid of Derek. Robert admitted during one of our counseling sessions, there was always something intimidating about his confidence and charm. I stayed silent instead of standing up for what I knew was right. The healing process would take time, but for the first time in years, our family relationships were built on honesty and transparency rather than manipulation and fear. Derek's trial became one of the most closely watched criminal cases in our county's history. The combination of murder, financial fraud, and elaborate psychological manipulation had captured public attention, while our family's story highlighted the devastating impact of domestic abuse and elder exploitation. Prosecutor Amanda Stevens assembled a comprehensive case that demonstrated Derek's pattern of escalating criminal behavior over multiple years. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said during opening statements, "this case is about a man who systematically destroyed everyone who trusted him in pursuit of money and power." Derek's defense attorney tried to argue that his client was a victim of mental illness and childhood trauma, but the evidence of premeditation and calculated planning was overwhelming. The burner phone text messages alone provided a detailed roadmap of Derek's criminal schemes and manipulation tactics. During the trial, multiple expert witnesses testified about Derek's psychological profile and the sophisticated nature of his manipulation techniques. Dr. Jennifer Ross, the court-appointed psychiatrist, explained how Derek had exploited specific psychological vulnerabilities in each of his victims. Derek Henderson studied his targets carefully and crafted individualized manipulation strategies, Dr. Ross testified. He exploited Margaret Henderson's maternal instincts, Robert Henderson's conflict avoidance tendencies, and the extended family's existing jealousies and insecurities. The most powerful testimony came from the victims themselves. Margaret took the stand to describe how Derek had systematically turned her against me, using edited recordings and fabricated stories about threats of violence. "My son convinced me that my other son was dangerous," Margaret testified through tears. "He used my love for both of them as a weapon to destroy our family. The guilt and shame I feel for believing his lies will stay with me forever." Robert's testimony focused on Derek's intimidation tactics and the atmosphere of fear that had developed in our family over several years. Derek had a way of making you feel like you were disappointing him if you questioned his version of events. Robert explained to the jury, "I knew something felt wrong, but I was afraid to challenge him directly. My silence enabled his abuse of everyone who loved him." Sarah testified about the medical evidence suggesting Derek had been poisoning Grandpa Samuel, describing the pattern of symptoms that hospital staff had attributed to normal aging, but which were actually consistent with pharmaceutical manipulation. Samuel Henderson's confusion and disorientation weren't natural, Sarah explained to the jury. Someone was deliberately causing cognitive impairment to make him more susceptible to changing his will. Uncle Frank's testimony revealed that Derek had approached multiple family members with schemes to discredit me and gain control of the inheritance. Derek tried to recruit me into lying about Jim's mental state, Frank testified. When I refused to participate, he threatened to ostracize me from family gatherings. I was afraid of him, but I couldn't bring myself to lie about my nephew. The financial evidence presented by FBI Agent Park demonstrated the sophisticated nature of Derek's embezzlement scheme and his connections to organized fraud networks. Derek Henderson wasn't working alone, Agent Park testified. He was connected to a network of individuals specializing in document forgery, identity theft, and financial fraud. This was organized crime, not impulsive behavior. Derek's accomplices had already pleaded guilty and were testifying against him in exchange for reduced sentences. Their testimony revealed additional crimes that investigators were still uncovering, including similar schemes Derek had planned against other elderly relatives in neighboring states. Derek had been researching the financial situations of elderly family members across 3 states, testified Marcus Webb, one of Derek's accomplices. He had detailed files on their assets' health conditions and family relationships. Jim's grandfather was just the first target. The revelation that Derek had been planning similar crimes against other elderly relatives sent shockwaves through our extended family and the broader community. Investigators discovered that Derek had been gathering intelligence on at least 6 other potential victims, including 2 great-aunts and a family friend who had no children. Derek Henderson's crimes represent a level of premeditation and callousness that defies comprehension, Prosecutor Stevens told the jury during closing arguments. He murdered his own grandfather, stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from his employer, and attempted to have his brother declared mentally incompetent to cover his tracks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: first-degree murder, elder abuse, embezzlement fraud, conspiracy, and attempted fraud. Derek showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, maintaining the cold, calculating demeanor he had displayed throughout the trial. Judge Patricia Coleman sentenced Derek to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charge, plus additional decades for the financial crimes and elder abuse. Derek Henderson represents a clear and permanent danger to society, Judge Coleman said during sentencing. His crimes demonstrate a level of manipulation and callousness that cannot be rehabilitated. The sentencing hearing also provided an opportunity for victim impact statements. Margaret spoke about the trauma of realizing she had been manipulated into betraying her own son. Derek didn't just steal money and take a life, Margaret told the court. He poisoned every relationship in our family with lies and manipulation. The healing process will take years, but we're committed to rebuilding our relationships based on honesty and trust. Robert's statement focused on his commitment to being a more active and protective parent and family member. I failed to protect my family from Derek's abuse because I was afraid of confrontation, Robert said. I'm dedicating the rest of my life to making sure nothing like this ever happens to people I love again. My own statement centered on honoring Grandpa Samuel's memory through positive action rather than dwelling on Derek's betrayal. Samuel Henderson taught me that integrity and family loyalty are the most important values a person can have, I told the court. Derek's crimes represent everything our grandfather opposed, but his legacy will live on through the foundation we're establishing in his memory. During the weeks following Derek's conviction, our family worked together to establish the Samuel Henderson Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to elder abuse prevention and family therapy resources. The foundation would use portions of the recovered inheritance to provide education support services and legal assistance to other families dealing with manipulation and abuse. Margaret became one of the foundation's most effective advocates, speaking publicly about the warning signs of family manipulation and the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. Derek's manipulation worked because he understood our family dynamics and emotional vulnerabilities, Margaret told audiences at community education events. But awareness and communication are powerful tools for prevention. Robert took an active role in developing the Foundation's family counseling programs, working with professional therapists to create resources specifically designed for families recovering from manipulation and abuse. Healing from this kind of betrayal requires professional support and a commitment to changing dysfunctional communication patterns. Robert explained to other families dealing with similar situations. Sarah and I used our experience investigating Derek's crimes to develop educational materials about financial fraud and elder exploitation. We worked with law enforcement agencies to create training programs for recognizing and investigating complex manipulation schemes. The Foundation's work attracted national attention from organizations focused on elder abuse, prevention, and family violence. Within 6 months of Derek's conviction, we had received grants totaling over $500,000 to expand our educational and support programs. The Henderson family's story demonstrates both the devastating impact of family manipulation and the healing power of truth and accountability, said Dr. Maria Rodriguez, director of the National Center on Elder Abuse. Their foundation work is providing crucial resources for other families facing similar challenges. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome of our ordeal was the restoration of trust and communication within our immediate family. The therapy sessions we attended together helped us understand not just Derek's manipulation tactics, but also the underlying family dynamics that had made us vulnerable to his schemes. We learned to recognize and address conflict directly instead of avoiding it. Margaret reflected during one of our family meetings. Derek's manipulation thrived in an environment where difficult conversations were discouraged. The final resolution of Derek's case came 18 months after his arrest, when the appeals court upheld his conviction and life sentence. During that time, our family had undergone a complete transformation, rebuilding our relationships on a foundation of honesty, communication, and mutual support. The Samuel Henderson Foundation had grown into a nationally recognized organization, providing resources and support to families dealing with elder abuse and manipulation. We had helped over 200 families navigate similar crises and had trained law enforcement officers in 12 states to recognize sophisticated manipulation schemes. Margaret had become one of the Foundation's most powerful advocates, traveling across the country to speak about her experience being manipulated into betraying her own son. Her presentations helped thousands of parents recognize warning signs and trust their instincts when family dynamics felt wrong. The most important lesson I learned is that love without boundaries isn't really love at all, Margaret told audiences at conferences and community events. Derek exploited my maternal instincts because I was afraid to set limits on his behavior or question his motives. Robert's transformation had been equally dramatic. The passive, conflict-avoidant father had become an active advocate for honest communication and family accountability. He led support groups for parents who had enabled manipulative adult children and worked with therapists to develop better intervention strategies. I spent years avoiding difficult conversations because I was uncomfortable with conflict, Robert shared with other parents in similar situations. But silence in the face of manipulation is actually a form of enabling that makes the abuse worse. Sarah and I had gotten married at the restored family ranch, with the ceremony focused on honoring Grandpa Samuel's memory and celebrating the healing our family had experienced. The ranch had been transformed into a retreat center where families could attend intensive therapy programs designed specifically for recovering from manipulation and abuse. Samuel Henderson's legacy isn't defined by how he died, but by how his values continue to guide our work, I said during our wedding ceremony. His commitment to integrity and family loyalty inspires everything we do through the Foundation. The most satisfying aspect of our Foundation work was helping other families avoid the trauma we had experienced. Our educational programs taught people to recognize early warning signs of financial exploitation and psychological manipulation, potentially preventing hundreds of cases of elder abuse and family fraud. Dr. Patricia Wells, My former therapist joined the Foundation's board of directors and helped develop mental health resources specifically designed for families recovering from manipulation and betrayal. The Henderson family story demonstrates the importance of professional support during crisis situations. Dr. Wells explained to other mental health professionals. Recovery from this kind of betrayal requires specialized therapeutic approaches that address both individual trauma and family systems. One of our most successful programs paired families dealing with manipulation with others who had successfully recovered from similar situations. The peer support model helped people feel less isolated and provided practical strategies for rebuilding trust and communication. Meeting other families who had survived similar betrayals was crucial for our healing process, said Jennifer Walsh, whose adult daughter had attempted to manipulate her into changing her will. The Henderson Foundation connected us with resources and support that we never could have found on our own. 3 years after Derek's conviction, the Foundation received a special recognition award from the National Association of Adult Protective Services for our contribution to elder abuse prevention and family education. The Samuel Henderson Foundation has revolutionized how we approach family manipulation and elder exploitation, said Association President Linda Morrison during the award ceremony. Their combination of personal experience, professional expertise, and community education has saved countless families from similar tragedies. But beyond the Foundation's public recognition and national impact, the most meaningful change had been in our immediate family relationships. We had learned to communicate openly about difficult topics, set healthy boundaries with each other, and prioritize honesty over harmony. The irony is that our family is closer now than it ever was before Derek's betrayal. Margaret reflected during our annual family therapy session. His lies and manipulation forced us to examine our relationships and communication patterns in ways we never would have otherwise. Robert had developed a particularly close relationship with me, making up for years of emotional distance and passive parenting. I wasted too many years being afraid of difficult conversations, Robert told me during one of our regular fishing trips to the ranch. Derek's manipulation taught me that avoiding conflict doesn't preserve relationships. It actually makes them more vulnerable to abuse. Sarah and I had expanded the ranch's therapeutic programs to include couples counseling and family communication workshops. Mental health professionals from across the region brought their most challenging cases to our facility because of our specialized expertise in manipulation recovery. What makes the Henderson Foundation unique is their combination of personal experience and professional training, said Dr. Michael Chen, a family therapist who regularly referred clients to our programs. They understand both the emotional impact of manipulation and the practical steps needed for recovery. The ranch itself had become a symbol of healing and renewal. Where Derek had planned to build his manipulative empire, we had created a place of safety, honesty, and genuine family connection. The main house displayed photos of Grandpa Samuel throughout his life, celebrating his values and legacy, rather than mourning his tragic death. Samuel would be so proud of what you've built here, Pastor Williams told me during the Foundation's annual memorial service. You've taken the worst possible betrayal and transformed it into a source of healing for hundreds of families. As I stood on the front porch of the ranch house, watching families participate in our weekend therapy retreats, I realized that Derek's ultimate failure wasn't just his criminal conviction or life sentence. His real failure was in completely misunderstanding what our grandfather had tried to teach us about family integrity and using our resources to help others. Derek had seen the inheritance as an opportunity for personal gain and manipulation. But Grandpa Samuel's true legacy wasn't the money or property he left behind. It was the values he modeled and the expectation that we would use our resources to make the world a better place. The greatest victory over manipulation and betrayal isn't punishment or revenge. I told the families attending our latest workshop, it's refusing to let someone else's choices define your character or limit your capacity for love and trust. The Foundation's work would continue long after our family had fully healed from Derek's betrayal. We had created systems and resources that would help thousands of families navigate similar crises with better outcomes and stronger relationships. But perhaps the most important lesson we learned was that healing from manipulation and abuse isn't just about recovering what was lost. It's about building something better and stronger than what existed before the betrayal occurred. Derek thought he was destroying our family, Margaret said during our final group interview for the Foundation's documentary project. Instead, his manipulation forced us to examine every relationship and communication pattern in our lives. We're not just recovered. We're better than we ever were before. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our loved ones is refusing to enable toxic behavior, even when it means temporary conflict and discomfort. Truth and justice may be painful initially, but they create lasting healing and prevent future victims from suffering the same abuse. The Samuel Henderson Foundation continues to grow and serve families across the nation, turning one family's tragedy into hope and healing for thousands of others. And every day, we honor our grandfather's memory not by dwelling on how he died, but by living according to the values he taught us about integrity, family loyalty, and using our resources to protect and serve others. Have you ever experienced manipulation from a family member or close friend? And how did you recognize the warning signs? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and rebuilding relationships. Share this story with anyone who might benefit from learning about manipulation tactics and recovery resources. Thank you so much for listening to our family's journey, and I hope our experience can provide hope and practical guidance for anyone facing similar challenges. Remember that healing is always possible, and no one has to face manipulation and abuse alone.